Welcome to the Friendly Podcast Guide, sorting through podcasts so you don't have to. I'm Andy Smiley, and I want to help you discover the right podcast without having to listen to an entire episode. Now, let's talk podcasts. Hello, everybody. Today we are talking about the Jaymac podcast. I'm sure you are going to love the conversation that I had with Jay, but before we get to that, I want to give you the details of his show. First off, this is the show description. It's time to get back to fearless honesty about the issues of the day. You may not always agree with me, but when it's all said and done, you will know why I believe what I believe. You may even be forced to think about something in a completely new way. The length of his episodes vary pretty widely. The episodes about the news of the day are usually between 10 and 20 minutes, but his quote-unquote down the rabbit hole episodes are closer to an hour. When I was talking to him during this interview, I had to cut it, but he talked about how his record for the longest down the rabbit hole episode that he did was 3 hours. Holy cow, so long. As far as kid ear friendly goes, he does talk about hard things sometimes. He talks about the news of the day. Sometimes that can include gun violence or other scary things that we might not want our kids to hear. I have found, though, that I know it's going to be a hard topic that I don't want my kids to hear just by reading the titles of the episodes. And so I usually just wait to listen to those when kiddos aren't around, or I'll just plug my headphones in. His show is ongoing. He goes live every Tuesday and Thursday at 9:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, but he releases content on his podcast feeds every weekday. And before we learn more about the vibe of the Jaymac podcast, we're going to take a quick break to ask you to rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts. All you have to do is scroll to the bottom of the Friendly Podcast Guides page in the Apple Podcasts app. Then you can rate it by giving it 1 to 5 stars, hopefully 5, and review it by clicking on the write a review button. This helps other people find the show, which will in turn hopefully help them find new podcasts that they will love. Now we get to hear from Jay as he talks about why he loves being a podcast host, his favorite subject to cover on his show, and much more. Jay, I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you for being here.
Oh, I'm so glad to do it. So good to catch up. And I always love talking about the stuff I'm working on. So thank you.
Of course. Well, I just have to say before we dive in that Jay knew me as a cute, fresh-faced, straight out of school Andy as I started my career as a radio producer. He is a wonderful mentor and friend, and I am so excited to talk about your podcast, Jay.
Well, you're very kind.
What made you want to start your podcast, Jaymac Podcast, and why do you keep making it? What draws you to it?
Well, it's a great question. I was in talk radio for 20 years, had the opportunity in Las Vegas and Dallas and Salt Lake City to be a paid talk show host. And so I got to this point where every time breaking news happens, every time something controversial happens, I had this ability to go to the public and say, hey, here's what I think about this. What do you think about it? And so it became such an important part of my coping system, right? That I could have that instant ability to do that. And then when I ran for Congress, I had to leave KSL, and because you can't be on the air and run for Congress at the same time. And so I had to leave it. I ran for Congress, was not successful in that. And afterwards, I decided, why not turn what I did on the air into a podcast where I have total control of the format and the content. And I really discovered that in today's world, you can get all of the same elements. I go live to 10 different platforms when my podcast goes up. I take live comments during the podcast. So it's really just recreating what I was doing on the air and getting that same therapy that I need on a regular basis, right? And I can reach a much larger audience because I have people listening in other countries now and in different states. So I love that.
That's awesome. It's kind of just the best of both worlds. You get what you did before plus some. Tell me, what do you want people to get out of your podcast?
That's a great question. The number one compliment that I ever can get is when somebody says to me, they say, Jaymac, I don't always agree with you, but I understand how you got there. And that's what we're missing in today's debate. There is no debate. There is no consideration of the other side. And I think it's tragic because you always get a better solution or understanding when you have a diversity of ideas, right? The more diverse those ideas, the better the chances are you're going to come up with something amazing. And we live in a time now where we tend to believe that only our way of thinking is acceptable and everything else should be shouted down or assaulted. And to me, we're losing so much potential from not accessing that diversity of ideas. So if I can create a situation on my podcast where people from all different viewpoints can come share their thoughts are considered and respected, and they're not attacked, then to me, that's just a small microcosm of what needs to happen in our society. And believe it or not, Andy, we've been able to do it. And you know, from working with me, it is possible to engage in important, heated discussions about the issues of the day, but to do so with respect and understanding. And that's what I crave. And I've found that those who are most loyal to the podcast, that's why they're there. They want to hear that diversity of ideas, but there's no other place for them to get it without it turning so toxic and so ugly.
I love that. Can you tell me a little bit about the vibe or like the feeling of your show? Is it a little more serious, like get to the issues, or a little more lighthearted? How do people describe your show, or how do you describe your show?
So we do deal with the important issues of the day, right? And so as lighthearted as I love to be, and I love to joke around, we are typically talking about the fate of the country, or, we'll talk about a police officer involved shooting, or we'll talk about gun violence and those types of things. So we do, especially in the beginning of the show, we usually get pretty serious. But what we've decided to do is there are those who want more, I don't know if it's frivolity or, want to joke around some more. What we do is at the first part of the podcast, we deal with the things that I've prepared, which are the most important issues of the day for me. And then we do a segment called Down the Rabbit Hole, which is where I let them ask me any questions about anything. And it usually ends up being about some conspiracy theories or something else. And we can go down the rabbit hole sometimes forever, but it's kind of a balance that we've struck, because there are those who are just there to hear my thoughts about the important issues of the day. And then there are those who just want to kind of, shoot the breeze and talk about all kinds of different things. And so I think we've found a good balance of both. That's my hope anyway.
I love that. Okay, so this might be hard, but do you have a favorite episode? I guess you just kind of I know you talk about what's going on currently, but is there one that stands out to you as like, wow, this was a really like meaningful or hilarious episode that really were good ones for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I wouldn't assign it to any one particular episode, but episodes we've done about a particular theme. And that theme is mental health. And back from when you were on the air with me and now, mental health is something that I talk about on a regular basis. And I am brutally honest with people about my own background, my own experiences. The reason why I cherish these the most is because every time I talk about my own struggles and the time in my life where I thought that of the most drastic solution, I started getting text messages from people saying, I am going through that right now. And sometimes just that interaction that they hear from some podcaster or talk show host who has expressed an interest in them, it saves lives. And I think that one of the things I try to do on the show is I put it all out there. In fact, sometimes I come home and my wife will have listened and she's like, you share too much. And I'm like, I don't feel like you can relate to me unless I'm a real human being. I know that both on my time on the radio and as a podcaster, that we've saved lives, and not because we did anything, miraculous, or we wrote a huge check, or we pulled somebody out of a moving car, but because I simply said, I really went through some bad stuff, and I'm actually going through some stuff right now. Unfortunately, in our society, when people struggle, they feel like they're alone in that struggle. And in my most difficult time in life, I didn't tell a soul what I was going through. And if you would have seen me, you wouldn't have known any different. I would have been the same smiley, happy. My wife didn't know, nobody knew. And it wasn't until I told somebody that dam burst and I was able to finally seek help. So it's those opportunities that I've had to just, share the hardest moments of my life and see how that impacts people. I wish in society we did a better job of sharing our struggles with people.
Yeah, I feel like more people need permission to say how they're really feeling. And it sounds like you're giving them that permission, which I feel like we all need sometimes. We all need the reminder that it's okay to be having a hard time and to talk about it so that you can get some help. I love that. So my last question is, where can people find you? How do we watch you live?
Yeah. So if you just search for Jay Mcfarland or search the Jay Mcfarland podcast, or you can go to the website, jaymcfarland.com, and it's McFarland. So jaymcfarland.com. You'll see all my projects there. So we go live twice a week. And then I also release pre-recorded content throughout the week as well. So I'd love it if you stop by, and please participate in the comments. We love that. And if you disagree with me, man, I want to hear it, because, if I'm missing something, I stress about that. If there's some point out there that I've missed, I want to hear it so that I can add it to my collective, or whatever you want to call it.
Love that. Yes. Perfect. Well, I will link all of that in the show notes so that people can find you easier. And thank you so much, Jay. This has been a fabulous, I feel a little bit like a therapy session, if I'm going to be honest. I love it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for talking about the podcast, and it's great to catch up.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want to hear about more podcasts, please follow or subscribe on your podcast app of choice. And just a reminder to rate and review this show on the Apple Podcast app. Talk to you soon.